what's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul. Still working on Superman number 9 for our friend Noah. Published June 25th, 1940, according to the indicia here. We have gotten rid of all the tackiness here from that adhesive. We used a combination of Bestine and scrapers and something I introduced to the channel last episode, Crepe Square. What we've found is that this area right here has been resistant, and it's very interesting. Still not entirely sure what happened here. I think a piece of tape was laid here. I think it was at some point later shifted, whether it was peeled up and laid back down, or whether as it was being applied it was kind of shifted, but there's little discontinuities in the print here, and there's a little gap here. And so I'm trying to be very careful. I'd love to preserve this copyright 1940, and I'd love to preserve as much as I can of where it says Superman right here and June 25, 1940. So I'm going to continue to work on this. We're going back and forth between solvent and Crepe Square and trying to just get the most we can out of this regarding this adhesive. Now, before, if you saw earlier episodes, if I just tapped it like this, it was tacky. It would stick to my finger and you can hear it. That's no longer the case, but it's still a little bit tacky. Watch. If I push down hard, right? So it's no longer like super tacky, but it still has some tackiness to it. So I have my magnification ring here, shedding light. I think the camera's going to stay focused here, so I think we're good. I've got a nice ergonomic position. My hands are clean and dry. The last thing I used here was solvent, so I'm going to work a little bit with the Crepe Square. I'm just dragging the Crepe Square here across the area. The Crepe Square has a tendency to ball up the adhesive, and you have to remove that. Nobody left me a comment about a better term to use than adhesive booger. So I guess we're stuck with that, even though I wanted to sound a lot more professional. As it was before, this method is working. It just was working a little bit too slowly for my liking, which is why we started alternating between this and the Bestine. And I think we may continue to do that. We'll just see. It's removing adhesive material. This was clean, and now you have all these little tiny eraser globs. I'm still going to resist calling them boogers. But it is very slow going. Those of you that have been with me for a while know that I do have a lot of patience, but I also like to work efficiently where I can. So if the best way to do a job is going to take hours and hours and hours, that's the way I'll do it. But at the same time, if there's a more efficient way to do that job just as well, I'm going to pursue that method. So think alternating between the Crepe Square and solvent approaches is really the best approach we can have here. To be efficient with our time and get the best results. I'm just testing to see how much drag my finger has when I pull it across this. So I can do it here where there wasn't any tape. I can get a sense for what the native paper feels like. And I can do it across here. When I do that, I definitely feel more drag in this area than the paper. This, though, does feel to me at the moment very similar to this. If I push really hard, I can still get a little bit of tackiness there, but it's not as much as here. So before we go back to solvent, I'm going to try to get this area to have a similar lack of tackiness that I feel there. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're tuning in to help yourself get some sleep, maybe you're in the right place. We're going to be doing this for quite a while. But by way of introduction, I'm Dr. Paul Kosnick. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. I studied chemical engineering and molecular biology in undergrad. Did my PhD in biomedical engineering. So I have a science background professionally, but way before that, I became obsessed with comic books, right just before I turned 10. And I'm over 50 now, so I've been collecting comic books over 40 years. And it's been a passion of mine. On and off throughout life, it's remained as a passion. It's something that I've always enjoyed sharing with others. You go through life, you have periods that require your full concentration on other things. There was a period when I was in college that I wasn't reading comics, and there was a period when I was trying to raise my very young daughters at the time that I wasn't reading comics. But most of my life I've had comic books and comic book collecting as a pretty significant part of what I do in my free time. And the channel here, welcome if you haven't been here before, is about that interest and how to grow the community. So as you can see, this is all material that has come up with the Crepe Square. This is mostly adhesive rolled up. It does have a few paper fibers in it, which is why it shows up as kind of whitish. I'm going to just brush this out of my way. I have a waste receptacle just off camera. And I think it might be time. Yeah, this feels now almost exactly like paper up here does. But it's still just a tiny bit tacky if you really push your finger in, which you don't get with the regular paper. Okay, so I don't want that. We want to remove all this adhesive to the extent possible. This is what we're using today, Bestine. I do have an affiliate link in the description if you want to support the channel. That's a good way to do it. The best supplier I've found for Bestine is on Amazon in the link. What I do, just because the Bestine is pretty safe, right? You want to use it in a well-ventilated area, but it's limited exposure vis-a-vis breathing it and or, you know, your fingers is well tolerated. I really want to use it. I really want to use the Bestine in a very controlled manner today. So I'm using a syringe. This is just a BD 3mm syringe with an 18 gauge needle. So I've put it in the beaker just to make it easier to load the syringe. And now I'm going to literally put drops here. With the syringe, you can actually literally deliver less than a drop. So we're really trying to sort of micro deliver. Of course, with any time you're handling a syringe, there's safety concerns. Make sure that you know how to safely handle a syringe and follow safety precautions both for the use and the disposal of sharps, please. Okay, I've let it get already too dry with yapping. So I'm going to come back in and add a little bit more. Okay, that's not much, but that's what we're trying to remove here. It's just that tiny, tiny amount that we are experiencing as tackiness. So as I was saying, what I'm trying to do with the channel is just sort of combine a couple of my passions. As I explained, I'm really passionate about comic books and just have enjoyed the medium, like I said, for 40 years, and it's given me a lot of joy. I think, you know, I wasn't actually a particularly good student when I was really young. I think having comic books in my life made me a better reader, which in turn made me a better student. Ultimately, I think Stan Lee having all those stories about scientists saving the day over and over again made me interested in science, probably steered me in the direction of engineering that I ended up in. So I feel I owe a lot to the medium, and I do have other interests, as I said, as a scientist, and another interest that I have is personal finance. I get into personal finance as a teen. My dad introduced me to stock buying. And it's another passion of mine. It's something that I think everybody should have an understanding of, and personal finance can be very liberating if you understand how to manage debt and investments, long-term savings. It can really free you up to do a lot of other things in your life and to take advantage of all that life has to offer in our society. So, because there's a lot of intersection in interest between comic books and investing, and a lot of people consider at least some comic book buying investments, I feel I have something to add to that conversation as well. And so on the channel, we have typically two kinds of conversations going on. We have a conversation about conservation of comics, and obviously today's video is a good example of that. And we have mostly market reports that I do vis-a-vis unboxings. So in my own personal collecting, and or in maybe not collecting but buying books to flip or to clean and press and slab and then ultimately flip into something that I'd rather have more, we can create value that we can pass on to others, and we can improve our collection, and in so doing improve the long-term value of our collection. And I enjoy that too. It's sort of a game within the game, or a hobby within the hobby. So I do videos on that subject as well if you're interested. I've had the channel for about a year, but really only started focusing in the last 60 or 90 days on what my voice was going to be online, what the channel was really going to be about. And I really appreciate everyone who's tuned in. Really appreciate all the subscribers, and really appreciate anybody, especially who's passed the word about the channel and who's helped me, bring new viewers to the channel to experience what we're trying to do. So thank you so much to everybody who's contributing to growing Liberty Hill Comics. I appreciate it. Our goal obviously is to make the hobby better than we found it, and to contribute more than we take away. So hopefully we're always trying to do that, and nobody's perfect, but more often than not, I hope we're certainly viewed as contributing more than we are taking from the hobby. It's interesting how stubborn this area has been relative to these areas that we cleaned up relatively easily. I think we're getting close to about as productive as we can be with this. So I think the next thing to do is to let this dry. Maybe not so obviously, but just in case folks didn't realize, you never want to use this Crepe Square on wet paper. And I've mentioned before, you know, these solvents don't wet the paper the same way water does. Water actually, because of its being a very polar solvent, actually gets into the paper structure and disrupts hydrogen bonds. And that's why wet paper is so weak. And you hear me on this channel and others on other channels that do comic book conservation say wet paper is weak paper, right? And that's absolutely true. But wet in the layman's terms just means anything with liquid on it, right? In this case, we're talking very specifically about water. This is actually a dry solvent, if you will. Similar to why they call dry cleaning. It's still a wet solvent, but it's not water. And so it doesn't break down, it doesn't disrupt hydrogen bonds because it's not a polar solvent. Because it's not a polar solvent, the paper is much stronger than it would be with water. For example, if I were doing the same manipulation with water, scraping with the scraper probably would have peeled paper layers off. It is much stronger in this solvent, wet, than it is in water, but still, I don't want to push my luck, and I don't want to use this on a wet or even on a damp surface. So I'm going to give this time to completely dry and come back at it with this. I think when I do that, we'll be done. This now feels almost like the paper here. There's a little bit of tackiness here, but I am concerned that I'm going to lose what's left of the Superman here. So we may just move on. To drag across it, I don't feel anything. It feels almost exactly like this paper here. Simple tacking test like this that you saw before, the paper was going with my finger. It's not now. If I push really hard, I can still generate a little bit of tackiness in a few of the areas, especially here and here. So I'm going to come at those with the Crepe Square once this dries. And I think we'll save that for a future upload. So I will say at this time, thank you again for joining me on this journey. I really appreciate all of you. Those of you that are turning in for the Omega Watch, I am clearly middle management at best. And until next time, take care of one another.